Good morning, Eagle Creek. Great to have all of you out here. My name's Matt. I'm the pastor here. If you're with us here for the first time, you're actually jumping into the second part of a series called Ready for More. And we're focusing on some key areas of our life where if we get bigger and better and build these things in our life, it really energizes so many areas of our life. And so today we're focusing specifically in the area of friendships, on how to build caring friendships. Whenever I was younger, my kids were little, they were like toddlers in grade school and this sort of stuff. I wonder how many parents can relate to this. We'd go to the park, and when we go to the park, our kids would, in like 2 or 3 minutes, have another kid on the playground that was their buddy. And they would run and do slides and swings and whatever else there was to do. So much so to where by the time we left, we're like, they've made a new best friend. Or to where finally you'd have to acknowledge the other parent out on the playground and say, hi, I'm so-and-so's, dad. And, I see they've made buddies. Any of you parents here in the room kind of relate with me on that one? You've been through that kind of journey with your kids. It's interesting, though. We're like, why is it that kids are like so natural at friend building, but somewhere along the way, we're not quite as adept at it. We're not like every elevator we're on making best friends with the other person, or, every time we're standing in line. Maybe you are the person that you talk to literally everyone in line, and your kids are really annoyed by you because they want to leave stores and you stay and talk to strangers, I don't know where you fall in that category, but we are all on kind of this different part of the line here, the continuum of relationship. But I would say as a whole, it feels like as adults that we're not quite as successful. Maybe that's because of painful situations that have happened with us, and we become more suspicious of people and their motives, or a variety of different things. We have the blessing of living in Missouri. I know there are people online. It's spring break, and so probably half the churches in Florida this week. I don't know. We always are like the first weekend of spring break, everyone runs and does something. A real quick quiz question off the subject. How many of you this next week plan to at least get out and do something with the family? Okay, so I don't know if you're camping or just going up to the zoo or whatever, but it looks like several people are going to get out and have a little bit of fun. We had spring break with our kids last week and got out, and we're down at Silver Dollar City. And while I'm at Silver Dollar City, the lines were immense. They were crazy. They were super long. And one of them was the food line I was in, and it probably took me 45 minutes to go through the food line. I had a 5-year-old boy in front of me in the food line. We wanted to do for that entire 40 minutes? He wanted to tell me his entire life story. And I couldn't hear him because I have a little bit of tinnitus, and when there's a crowd going, and so the whole time I'm leaning down, I'm like, I'm okay, Mom, I'm not a weird guy, but your kid, I feel bad not, and my wife was standing with me, so she could attest I'm not a weird guy, so I had that. Anyway, so he's telling me a story, and in the story we get Grandma died, and his mom's like, he's an open book. I'm just telling you, we're getting to know all about our life and our home and everything. I'm like, oh, well, I'll act like I can't hear some of it then, But it's amazing how friendships for little kids are so natural and easy, and they step into it. And for other folks, they're just a little bit hard. And so today, we're going to be focusing on one particular friendship in the Bible. It's a guy named David and his best friend Jonathan. And they both have some commonalities, and we'll focus at the beginning of this message on how we form friendships and what is God's role in deciding who your friends are in this kind of relational forming. And then we're going to talk about just a few key attributes to this specific relationship. However, if we were to go through the Bible and explore all the teaching in Scripture on friendships, there would be many, many pages, probably books that we could write on it. So we're going to obviously leave a number of the teachings of the Bible about friendship out today. It's not possible to get to it all. But before we do that, I want to talk to the guys for just a second. Guys, I'm going to give you something that you instinctively know culturally. And ladies, you probably instinctively know this. Women are generally, based on most sociological studies, a little bit better at forming long-term female relationships than guys are at forming long-term male relationships. The number of quality female relationships that the average female has is quite a bit higher than the average number that men have. And in the last 70 to 80 years, the number of high-quality male friendships that the average American male has been declining by the decade. And there's some sociological reasons for that have happened in America. And the kind of friendships are actually very different. What is considered a friendship today between men is very different than what it had been in the centuries before and what it is actually in many cultures of the world today. And I'll give you, for instance, I was in Ethiopia a number of years ago, probably like 14, 15 years ago. And when my wife and I were there, and as we're there, we're watching men hanging out on street corners, talking and just hanging out and talking. Arms wrapped around each other's shoulders, 2 or 3 at a time, and they're leaning in, heads almost touching, and they're laughing and talking and carry on, sitting on the corners, walking down the streets with their fingers intertwined, swinging their arms, walking down the street. In their culture, straight, heterosexual guys, commonplace, do that all the time. I meet with one of the guys, Sherry and I are talking to this couple, and we're touring this garden area, outdoor garden area, and the guy grabs hold of my hand as we're walking along, intertwines his fingers, and swings my arm while we're walking along. I'm gonna tell you, I was sweating. I was stressed. I was like, man, I know this is cultural, and I'm here, and it's part of the culture, and I'm not gonna fight culture, it's just part of it. But my wife, she laughed and laughed. We had to get on a tour bus afterwards, and we were driving back. And she's like, I was dying. I was like, Matt is crawling out of his skin right now. But he's a nice guy, and he's not going to offend someone at another culture. And, she had me pegged. I went through all of those range of emotions. But let me describe American culture a couple centuries ago here. Daniel Webster. You heard of Daniel Webster? A dictionary kind of named after, Anyway, American senator, a great orator, began letters to most of his male friends this way. My lovely boy. How many of you don't begin your text to your buddies that way? You don't start off with, my lovely boy, I was thinking of you today and wondered if you'd like to play golf. It doesn't go that way in your text most likely, but that's the way Daniel Webster began. My lovely boy. And how many of you don't sign your emails off to your buddy with Daniel Webster's sign off? Very affectionately yours. You don't do that to all your guy buddies? Start it off with my lovely boy and end it with very affectionately yours? That's commonplace, by the way. That was just normal. Theodore Roosevelt, manly man. Theodore Roosevelt, his letters to his friends, to his guy friends, are just filled with affectionate, loving, gracious, kind language. And he's a manly man of his time, and that's the way he wrote. Physical affection with men in the 1920s, there are tons of pictures. If you look for old pictures of buddies in the 1920s, you'll find tons of pictures of guys hanging on each other, hugging each other, holding hands in the picture. You're like, really? Guys did that back then? Common American male back then. Now, by the way, the objective of this service is not to get all the men to hold hands when they leave. So just write that one off. Guys, don't stress out. Don't start sweating. I'm not there either. But I want to kind of set up a contrast to say, so what's changed? Why are things so different? Why was it this way and now it's this way? And what's gone on? And what can we do to sort of redeem male relationships? And not just that. Honestly, for ladies, the quality and quantity of relationships has declined. Not at the same rapid level because ladies are so oriented relationally as a whole, sociologically, that they often overcome hurdles to form relationships. Whereas men often are very task-oriented, a little less relational-oriented, and so it's easy for culture to create so much pressure on them that they sort of do back away from relationships, and certainly studies are showing that that's what's occurring in our culture. So what was it that changed? I'll just give you 3 real quick sociological things before we get into the biblical teaching from David and Jonathan on how to form relationships and then grow ones that have one. The one big one was the Industrial Revolution, where neighbors partnered with each other in an agricultural society. Men competed with one another in an industrial society. The guy was not your buddy who you need to stay close to because he could loan you his cow or his ox to, or his horse or whatever. But he was now your competition, and you wanted the position. He was going to get it being the manager, and this guy working beside you is not your buddy. He's going to help you get there. He's your competition that's going to keep you from that. That was a big one. Through the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and on, the acceptance of homosexuality in American society made heterosexual men distance themselves from other males to show a distinction, to show who they were. It's just culturally a phenomenon that has actually occurred, and most sociological studies will say, yes, that's part of the distancing of the male to other males in our society. And the third one is just a very, very common practice that began once again 60, 70 years ago, and it's sped up, it's increased, is American mobility. We move so often that with our careers, we move with careers, generally speaking, not true of you. Some of you have lived here all your life, but many Americans move so often that they don't have time to form lifelong relationships that stay with them from the cradle to the grave. You don't have those kind of relationships, generally speaking, as Americans. So with that, how do we have the kind of quality relationships if culturally it seems like everything's fighting against us, and the statistics show that we're struggling to have the kind of long-term friendships that really breed a healthy life? By the way, it shows actually in studies that men who have a lot more healthy relationships, a couple things are true. They live longer, and they stay healthier and happier. It's interesting that relationships have that kind of impact on us. We live longer, we stay healthier, we stay happier. Part of the reason is because your buddies give you a hard time for getting fat. They do. My buddies have no problem saying, hey, saw you online, that belly's coming back. You got to get out and work out. Now, I got three good friends. One of my college buddies, I had a snaggle tooth. I've now got a little fake tooth, and I'm going to do a crown in there. And here's my roommate from college, who was best man at my wedding. He was here this fall before I'd gotten the teeth work done. And Sherry had been saying, you need to get that tooth pulled. You need to get that, I knocked it out in a gym class trying to impress someone, swinging on a rope, flew through the air, hit my face on the ground, cracked my jaw, knocked teeth out, knocked my front tooth out. And anyway, whole long story. Here's my friends. Everyone's being nice and polite about that snaggle tooth I had this fall. My buddy Ed says, Matt, you look like a crack addict. I'm like, what? He says, what's wrong with that snaggletooth? You need to get that thing fixed. He said, you're like up in front of people. That thing looks bad. I'm like, thank you. That's why you stay healthier, because you have friends that'll say that kind of garbage to you, And he loves me, and I know he loves me, but, that's the reality of it. So you stay healthy. I don't know if I stayed happier in that one, but I got a good laugh out of it. I just laughed, and I was like, thanks, Ed. He said, well, if your friends can't say it to you, who can, I'm like, well, you got a point there. So here we go. We're going to launch into this. What does it take, and how do you have the kind of friendships and the quality of friendships that really are the game changers, the ones that do make you healthier and happier and live longer and in a better place, probably spiritually as well? And so we're going to look from Jonathan and David's life. Here they are. The first one is this: look for commonalities. Everyone say, look for commonalities. Okay, so commonality means that there's just common things that we like. Ladies, you find a lady and you're like, she's got two little screaming toddlers, and so do I, and I'm going crazy, and she's going crazy, and she's going to be my best friend. We're going to go crazy together for the next 3 years, And so you find those commonalities. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 2, it tells us about the crown prince of Israel, Jonathan, and his aptitude towards military leadership. He was courageous, loyal, honorable. In 1 Samuel 13:2, Saul, the king of Israel, chose 3,000 men of Israel. In other words, they were like the elite army forces for the Israeli army. He chose 3,000. And 2,000 were with Saul, with the king at Michmash in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan, the crown prince of Israel. Jonathan, he's now in charge of 1,000 of them. With 1,000 men at his disposal, one day Jonathan not liking the fact that Saul will not go, his dad will not lead the army and go attack the Philistines. Guess they're outnumbered like 10-1. It's insane. And the Philistines, by the way, have already invaded Israel several times. They've taken literally every sword from every Israeli. In fact, if you even want to get your plowshare sharpened, you had to go to the Philistine blacksmiths to sharpen them because they basically killed off all the Israeli blacksmiths. So now it's like you not only don't have swords, you don't have a way to make a sword. And that's the way they're ensuring their dominance over Israel. And there were only 2 swords in all of Israel. Saul had one, and his son Jonathan had the other. And so one day Jonathan, just frustrated that his dad is not going for it, Jonathan says to his armor bearer, hey, I don't want to basically alert dad by taking all 1,000 people. Let's go, you and I, against that Philistine outpost. And if they call us up to fight him, we'll go up and fight him, and God is going to give him into our hands. And sure enough, the Philistines say, come on up and fight us. And they go up and fight him. He's killed about 20 guys in the space of about a half acre. Before the rest of the troops catch on, there's a big commotion. Where's Jonathan? Hey, our commander's on the hill fighting without us. And they rush the hill, and they start to overtake the Philistine army, and they lead all of Israel in a great victory that day. David, out in the field watching sheep. Dad says, hey, go to your brothers on the front line, bring them some food. And he does, and there's this great warrior, huge behemoth of a guy, armored in every way with every kind of weapon known to the Philistines at that time. David is there in his shepherd clothing and with a slingshot. And the giant begins to call down curses on the people and belittle them and belittle their God. And David gets indignant. He's like, who will go and fight against this man? And what will the king do for the one who fights against him? Well, the king said he'll make him rich and give him his daughter in marriage. And he said, I'll fight him. And they bring him to the king. And king says, you can't fight this. He's a warrior who's been fighting from his youth. And you're just a youth. You know, he's been fighting since his youth. And, here, try my armor on before you go. Now I can't wear your armor. It's too big for me. Let me just go down with my slingshot and I'll kill that guy. David rushes to the field with the slingshot and plants one in his head, kills him. The giant falls on the ground and runs over and cuts off his head. There's some commonalities here. There's some commonalities. Both of them courageous. Both of them indignant against the Philistines, ready to do anything, put their life on the line to throw off the shackles of the Philistines over their own people. Both of them don't need to have all this extra support and help. They're almost reckless in their courage. Jonathan, you got 1,000 guys and you take one. David, you have the king's armor and you take none. You take a slingshot against a giant. Courageous, almost recklessly so. Now, I don't know who that person is that God would connect you with. Maybe it's they just love golf like you do. Maybe it's just they got kids your kid's age and you're at the soccer field all the time. Maybe it's just that they joined the same small group and you guys have been hanging. Maybe it's they can describe everything about coffee and they know all the best coffee places in Kansas City and that makes them your best friend. Maybe it's their kids are grown and gone and your kids are grown and gone and you both like to try all the restaurants in town. And so they're your restaurant buddies. I don't know what it is, but I think there's some commonality. But one of the things I want to encourage you and challenge you with is one of those commonalities needs to be Christ. I believe that whenever you find the right best friends, there's something about their faith that should inspire you to grow, should inspire you to move forward in your faith. And so I want to challenge you to begin to consider the people that we make as a permanent part of our relational life need to share the kind of faith that encourages and challenges us and moves us forward in our faith. And so I want to challenge you towards that. Look for the commonalities. And David and Jonathan had those in spades in their life. So let me give you the second thought, is recognize soul threads. Everyone say this with me. Recognize soul threads. I'm going to explain that. I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but you'll hear it in this passage. So David has gone out and fought against Goliath. In 1 Samuel 17, 57 through 18, verse 1, it says, "And as soon as David returned from striking down the Philistine, Abner, who was the leader of the army, took him and brought him before Saul, and with the head of the Philistine in his hand." I just kind of think that's funny, because I'm picturing David, this little guy, carrying this huge head, and the fact that he wouldn't let it go. I'm like, they chased the Philistines, like, down. And I'm thinking, did David chase the Philistine carrying a head? I don't know. Anyway, I just try to picture the moment. And then he's like, probably everyone's like, "Let me hold it like it's a trophy. Let me hold it, let me hold it, let me hold it." Someone take my picture, and they drew out the picture real quick, and there you go, But the point is, David has this. How many of you know that would leave an impression on you if someone showed up at your doorstep with a giant's head? Like, "Hey, how you doing? What you got there?" "Oh, I cut a guy's head off earlier." Yeah, it gets you thinking. For me, it gets me thinking if the cat or the dog or whatever brings a rabbit up to the back door. So that would get my attention there. And Saul said to him, the king says to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, listen to this, here it is. The soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. It's like God put them together at a heart level. And every now and then, God does this. Every now and then, God will just put two people that are meant to be friends for life together. And he'll connect you, and you'll almost right off the bat say, "I connect with that guy. I connect with this lady. We're just like brothers and sisters on the inside." One of my roommates in college, became a roommate actually, his name was Joseph Ong. He was from Singapore. And we met and we just hit it off almost immediately. We connected, and his native language was Chinese, but Singapore was a British colony. And so, English was, he was used to speaking that, but we connected super well right off the bat. And still to this day, Joe Ong is a great friend of mine. My daughter Emerson went over and was an intern for him in his church. He pastors in Pearl City, Hawaii. He's suffering for Jesus over there. Poor guy, pretty rough. But he's a guy over the years, I continue to glean from him, learn from him. He gives me great books to read. I wish I could say I give him great books to read. He gives me better books than I give him. I'm always getting more off of him. And so there are these connections that God makes. There's a verse in James that says that God is the giver of all good gifts. And in God, there's no variableness, neither shadow of turning. In other words, when God gives you something good, he doesn't regret it. He doesn't change his mind and say, "I don't know." And I think about this gift of that soul tie, that soul connection. When God gives you a friendship, I want you to think about this. When God gives you a friendship, and you're supposed to be knit together. And God is like, "Man, this must be a God thing that I met you and talked to you. We just share all this in common." It's like there's a connection right off the bat. You're not supposed to walk away from that and forget about it because you're busy with your kids. You're not supposed to walk away and say, "Well, I got too much going on at work to make a friend, and I got too much." If God decided he wanted to give you a friend, how many of you think maybe you ought to be listening to that and saying, "Okay, God, then I guess I'm supposed to work it out and hang out." Doesn't mean you give up all your responsibilities, obviously. I'm not being ridiculous here. You still are, if you're a parent, you're still a parent, or married, you're still married, or working, you're still working. I get that. But how many of you know that when it says every good gift comes from above, from the Father of lights, in whom there is no, I know it in the King James, in whom there is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. In other words, no regret in the action that he took. He decided, and he was right when he decided, and he's not changing his mind when he gave you a good gift. If he gave you the good gift of a great friend and a soul connection, then how many of you just suspect that God might be right about the timing as well as the friend? Amen? And so I want to encourage you to embrace the friendships that God gives you and hands you as a gift and say, "God, thank you so much that you gave me this. I need to act on that and hang out with them and call them up and spend some time and figure it out." Figure out the friendships that God has given you. Now I'm going to switch gears and we're going to hit the second portion of the message, which is really this, or I'll say the third portion because I kind of set things up at the beginning. The third portion is this. What do we do when we have the friendship? What can we learn from David and Jonathan? Obviously, there's so much more in the Bible about friendship, but I'm just going to give you 3 thoughts from David and Jonathan's life that really, it was the investment that made their relationship powerful for a lifetime. Here it is. The first thought is this: put your friend's interests first. Everyone say that one with me. Put your friend's interests first, okay? I want you to listen to what Jonathan does, and then I'm going to explain it because it's cultural and it won't totally make sense without some context. 1 Samuel 18, verse 4. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword. How many swords were there in Israel? 2. And even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. Most biblical historians believe that the robe Jonathan was wearing, his outer garment, was the royal robe that said he was the heir to the throne of Israel. And there were only 2 people with a sword, the king and his son. And something about what David did out on the battlefield that day against Goliath and leading the entire nation of Israel into battle and into victory made Jonathan, most biblical historians will say, take off his right to the kingdom and his power to defend it and hand them both over to someone he believed was more qualified than himself. Now that's a friend when they see, you know what? You're better for this girl than I am. And so I'm not going to pursue her because I think you two are right together. And I may be more Rico Suave than you are. I might win, but I'm not going to win because you need to win. And I'm not going to go after that position at work because I could get it because I have the relationship. But you have the ability and the skill. And you should get this, and you should do this. And I'm backing off. And I can tell that really funny story that happened to the 2 of us better than you because I'm more dominant, more talkative, and I'm a better storyteller and louder, and I'll talk right over the top of you. But I'm not going to do that because actually it's more your story than it was mine. So I'm just going to shut my mouth and let you tell the story right now. You see, when a friend is really a friend, they know when to back off and let you shine. And they know when it's your time and when it's theirs, and they don't take it away from you. Jonathan even told him as much. It's not just a symbolism of the robe and the sword. In 1 Samuel 23, 17 and 18, the crown prince of Israel, Jonathan, says to his buddy David, you shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Saul, my father, knows this. And the 2 of them made a covenant before the Lord. Even though David getting ahead mean that Jonathan would never be king. Can I tell you something about Jonathan? Jonathan would have been a great king for Israel. That kind of courage, that kind of loyalty, that kind of leadership, that kind of selflessness is exactly what you want in a king. And he gave it away to the man who had become known as the greatest king Israel ever had. That's the kind of friend that you want to be. I could be great, but my friend was destined for this. And so I'll give it to him. In Philippians 2, verse 3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility count others as more significant than yourself. Over and over through the years, I've seen giftedness in guys that pastor under me. And I've said to them, you need to be preaching. You don't need to be sitting under me. You've sat under me, but you need to go and lead, and you need to start a church, or you need to lead. Your gift is bigger than your position. Stay in your position for a while and learn what you got to learn, but then you got to go do what you're called to do. And we've sent a number of people out, and they've gone and started other churches, and that's fine with me. My job is not to hold people back. My job as a friend is to push people forward, right? It's not about me, it's about his kingdom. And it's not about you, it's about God's kingdom. And you need to see the kingdom of God and other people and get behind that. Now, I want to mention a couple other thoughts here. David, after he kills Goliath, gets the prize. part of the king's household, marries the king's daughter, Jonathan's sister. Now Jonathan and David are brother-in-laws. Now they both eat at the king's table and live at the king's palace, and they hang out all the times, and their families are best friends, and they're family now. Their brother-in-laws, nieces and nephews, and grandpa and grandma, and all this stuff, it's all happening there. Part of the home, part of the family. They go out to battle together and fight together. They probably practice, sword fighting and, shooting their bow and arrow and whatever else they do to be ready for battle. They live life together. They're probably fishing buddies by this point. They're close. They're tight. But Saul, the king, cannot handle David's rise to fame. And it eats him up at a level that's crazy. It starts to turn him crazy. One night he gets so crazy with jealousy at David's fame because the song is sung every time they go to battle and come back in from battle, and they go through all the little villages on the way back to Jerusalem. Everyone's singing the same song. All the ladies come out and dance before King Saul, and then back behind him you got Jonathan and David riding in, and they're dancing and singing this song that Saul ought to love. Saul has killed his thousands, and Saul's like, yeah, I killed my thousands, and then the line goes on. But David has killed his tens of thousands. Yeah, Saul's not having it. One night at dinner, picks a spear up and chucks it across the room at David, trying to nail him, trying to end it right there before he can rise. Misses him, and David takes off. And then we pick up with Jonathan having to find out, did Dad just lose it momentarily? Or is Dad really going to kill David, my best friend? And David's hiding out in the field, and Jonathan's trying to find out the answer to the question, so they know if David's got to make a run for it or if David's safe to come back into the palace. And I want to get to this fourth thought. The fourth key to growing a great friendship is you have to defend your friend's honor, even when it costs you yours, your reputation. Your friends. You have to defend your friend's honor. Everyone say, defend your friend's honor. And that's a challenge. In 1 Samuel 20, verse 30 to 34, Saul was furious with Jonathan and yelled, "You're no son of mine, you traitor. I know you've chosen to be loyal to the son of Jesse. You should be ashamed of yourself. And your own mother should be ashamed that you were ever born. You'll never be safe, and your kingdom will be in danger as long as that son of Jesse is alive. Turn him over to me. He deserves to die." Why do you want to kill David? Jonathan asked. What has he done? Saul threw his spear at Jonathan and tried to kill him. Then Jonathan was sure his father really did want to kill David. Jonathan was angry that his father had insulted David so terribly, and he got up and he left the table and he didn't eat anything that day. Now, whenever I read this, I'll just be honest with you. At first, I was just a little bit puzzled by the reaction. Me, at a gut level, whenever I read this story, it doesn't seem like a correct response because it says Jonathan was angry that his father had insulted David terribly. I kind of get that, but my first reaction is I would be angry that my dad threw a spear at me. How many of you would say, that might tick me off? Mom is throwing knives at me in the kitchen. Dad, she gone crazy. I don't know what, or Dad is throwing a baseball bat across the garage at me. He's lost his mind. That might make me mad. But no, Jonathan is mad because he's defending the honor of his friend. He's defending the honor. He's like, I'm telling you, he's a good guy. He's for us. He won't take anything that God doesn't give him. And if God gives him, who are we to stand in the way of it? David's not like that. He's not going to turn his back on me. David's made a promise to me. He's made an oath to me. He's never going to break his oath with God. He loves God. He would never do that to me. He loves me. He's my friend. Dad, I'm telling you, it's okay. He's not like going to kill you in your sleep. Relax. You sided with him. I'm ashamed of you. Your mother should be ashamed of you. You should be ashamed of yourself. He will kill you to take this king. No, he would never do. And he's so angry. And I think about the friendships you've had over the years. How many times have people questioned the motives of your friend? And have you defended? Have you stood there? And honestly, I mean, teenagers right now, I'm going to tell you, if your mom and dad are questioning the motives of your friend, they're not jealous that your friend is going to take over the mortgage and steal the home. Okay? They're worried about you, not themselves, okay? But most likely, they're worried about you, not themselves. So don't insert that argument into this and go home and use it. It doesn't fly. This is different than that. This is an argument from innocence. David is innocent. It's an argument about a crazy, vicious, selfish person, Saul, who's deranged and throwing spears at his own children and son-in-law. But I want to encourage you to say, you know what? I will stand by the honorable actions of an honorable person that I love, even if it costs me. Even if it costs me at work, even if it costs me with my friends, even if it costs me, you know, my wife is mad at me because I'm standing by a friend that I know is an honorable guy. And I've been his friend for 20 years. And you got to understand, honey, he may be a lot of work and he may take my time up sometimes, but he needs someone to stand by him. And husbands and wives, we have to understand the relationships that our spouses come into marriage with. We have to be more accepting frequently than we want to be. But I think it shows honor for your spouse, for your husband, for your wife to stand by people. And I think it ought to tell you something about how they'll stand by you too. If they won't give up on that buddy, they won't give up on you. And we ought to be admiring that in each other. The final thought I want to give you right here from this passage. The fifth key is we show loyalty and love in adversity. David's hiding out in the field. He's waiting for Jonathan, and Jonathan knew. He's going to kill you. That's all there is to it. He's going to kill him. Next time David walks in the house, he'll get the guards on him. He'll stab him in the back. It doesn't matter. He's just going to kill him. And he's got to go tell his best friend, buddy, we ain't never going fishing again. We ain't never practicing swords again. We ain't ever shooting arrows out back. We're never walking shoulder to shoulder into battle. We're never riding back victorious. We're not sitting at the table with our wives and our kids at dinner anymore with the family. Because my dad just ruined it all. He wrecked it. I'm sorry, but it's just the way it is. You got to run. And in that moment, they did something that was very culturally dissimilar to American society, but very appropriate for a Jewish man at the time. 1 Samuel 20, 41 and 42. And they kissed one another, and they wept with one another, David weeping the most. Why? Because he's the one who has to leave it all. He's the one leaving everything behind. David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, go in peace, because we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord shall be between you and me, and my offspring and your offspring forever. And he arose and departed. By the way, the greeting with a kiss on the cheek is absolutely common today in Israel and in many nations of the world. Proverbs 17:7 says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. A brother will stand by you and love you through it and stick with you. They're the one that pull your hair back when you have cancer and you had chemo that day and you're puking over the toilet. They're born for adversity, and they're going to love you, and they won't leave you. They're the one who will shave their head when you had to shave yours. They're the one who's never going to walk out. At the end of the story, Jonathan, torn, he's got to be loyal to his father. He's got to be loyal to his friend. Stand by both of them. And how do I juggle this relationship? How do I stand by both? Jonathan one day, shoulder to shoulder with his father, enraged and crazed Saul goes out in a battle against the Philistines. And Jonathan's killed and Saul's killed. It's kind of not a bright moment in David's life, because a man runs back with the crown and brags to David, Saul has died and Jonathan's dead. That makes you king. Oh, you thought I would love to hear that my best friend's dead? Put him to death. And his soldiers killed the guy. He's like, you don't brag about the death of my best friend, even though I get to be king. And David just went into sorrow, into weeping. And when he was crowned king, he said, is there anyone left of the family of Jonathan? They said he had one son. One son is lame in the feet. His name's Mephibosheth. He said, bring him to me. In their time, that only meant one thing. You killed off all the heirs of the former guy so that no one else could ever be king after in that line. You kill off the entire line, and that ensures you're going to be king. They bring Mephibosheth to him. He falls to his face before David, expecting the end to come. You're Jonathan's son. Yes. You'll eat at my house from now on. And all the lands that your grandfather and your father held are restored to you. In fact, I'll send my servants out, and they're now your servants, and they'll work the land, and you'll possess all the wealth of your land, and you'll eat here at my table for the rest of your life. And Jonathan's son became his family. I want to encourage you. There's a payoff to relationship and friendship, and I think that payoff is a lifetime of giving and connecting and family, of relationship that you were created for, that God meant for you to have. And I hope that today, wherever you are, you'll just open your heart a little bit more. I hope that you'll find a friend that's like that if you don't have one. I hope you'll find a Christian friend, and hopefully at Eagle Creek, because you'll see each other and connect, and you can sit at church and grab lunch afterwards, and there's just something about being together with your family and your kids, and it's an additional connection for life. Doesn't mean it has to be. I'm just saying that's a cool thing if it can be. I hope you get on the phone this week and reconnect with the people that you've loved and have loved you well over the years and stood by your side. I hope that you'll be a little bit more open, guys. It's okay to do the handshake to the hug. Love you, man. Love you, bro. It's okay, right? You don't have to interlock fingers and walk out of here today. But I'm just telling you, it's okay, guys. It's okay. We can have real friendships that are connected, that are meaningful, and that are a gift from the Father above, who gives all good gifts without any variableness, neither shadow of turning. No regret that he gave you that friend that you connected with, heart and soul. No regrets. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you're a God who loves us so much, that you look on our need and our heart and the way you designed us for relationship. Even as children, that connectedness was part of our life. And you still to this day provide those moments of opportunity to form a friendship and a bond that can carry us through the most difficult hours and help us to celebrate the best hours of our life. And so I pray for every man and woman here in this room that there would be a renewed desire for the relationship we're created for, and a renewed ability to grow those relationships and restore relationships that we have absented ourselves from because of busyness and life and all these other things that happen. I pray that grace over each person here. In Jesus' name, amen and amen.